The following tutorial will show you how to set up and monitor a spatial relationship with the Ubisense Site Manager. A spatial relationship is nothing more than an interaction between two objects. This could be an object entering the space of another moving object, like two people interacting with each other, or an object moving into a defined space, like a shopping cart moving into a checkout area. In either case, you will define a shape for each object and then specify how those shapes will interact with each other. We will use a very simple example of monitoring when a person enters a conference room. In this case, we will be monitoring an object which is moving, that would be the person, and an object which is fixed, that would be the conference room. When everything is set up properly, you will have a shape defined for person objects and a shape defined for the conference room. On the screen, you will see something like this. When the cylinder around the person object is completely within the bounds of the conference room zone, it will trigger an entry event and turn red. When the shape around the person completely exits the bounds of the conference room, it will trigger an exit event and turn green. It is important to note that the bounds have to be satisfied in X, Y, and Z, so be careful when you create your shapes. As you can see in this example, the cylinder around the person is much smaller than the height of the conference room zone. We need to start by going into Site Manager and creating a new type called Zones so that we can create a conference room zone. So under Type, click New, create a type called Zones, click OK. You get a warning, go ahead and click OK. Also, you'll note that by default you have a type called Person, but it has no representation. So let's go ahead and import the standard person representation. Go to Rep, Import, and we want to go to the C drive, Program Files, Ubisense 2.1, and then the reps directory. Here we want to click on the person, and you have to click on person again for the 3D version. Click Open, and go ahead and name it Person Rep. Now we'll go back to the Types tab and set the representation for person objects to a person rep. Zones obviously do not need a representation because they are inanimate objects. Now the next step, we need to create a couple of objects. So under Object, click New. Let's make an object called Mike of type Person. And then we will create a zone object. So we go New. We'll call it Conference Room. And we will select Zones as the type. Click OK. Now we need to define the roles that will monitor the spatial relationships. So click on the Geometry tab. Here we need to create a new role. So click the New Role button. We'll start by creating what we call a zone role, and this will maintain all the different zones that you will create on your floor plan. Description is optional, so you can put something there or just click OK. Now you have two options. You can create an associated shape for each zone object, or you can create a shape for the type. We would not want to create a shape for the type because every zone is going to be different. So we'll be using the Objects option. And there are two options here. You can create an absolute shape, a shape that's not going to move, or a relative shape, which is a shape that will move as the object moves. Since we're going to be making a shape for the zone and the zone never moves, we want to click New Absolute. Select your area, click OK. This obviously is just one room, but let's pretend that the conference room is in this half of the room. Simply clicking the mouse drops down points. You can adjust those however you want. Clicking delete will delete the previous point. We have to associate this with an owner, and that's why we created an object called Conference Room. And you'll notice that it has a bottom and top, so the zone goes from 0 to 3.5 meters high. That's fine. Go ahead and click Save. Now we need to make a new role which describes the shapes for the person objects. So click New Role. We'll call it Person Role. Once again, description is optional. In this case, you could create a shape for every single person object that you have in Site Manager, or you can create one for the person type. Let's say you have 50 employees. If you use the Objects option, you'd have to create 50 individual shapes. So it's much better to use the types in this case. So I'm going to click New Relative on the types. For the owner, I'm going to choose Type Person. By default, it'll show you what the person icon is going to look like. So I'm going to click and then click the Page Down button so I can zoom in. And I'm going to create a cylinder around my person. Notice here that the bottom once again starts at 0 and the top is at 3. And if you remember, our zone shape goes from 0 to 3.5. So I want to make sure that this cylinder is always within the zone shape. So I'm going to change the bottom to 0.5 and 1.5 for the height. And go ahead and click Save. Now I have to tell the system how these two objects are going to interact. So what we're interested in is whenever the conference room contains people. So what we can do is go back up here, change to the zone roles, and you have these two options at the bottom. So we want to use the one in the lower left because that is when zone role contains people. So we'll hit the Edit button and click Person Role. Now if you were to switch back over to the person role, you will see that it automatically put zone role in the contained by box. And that means whenever people or persons are contained by zone roles, it'll also flag an event. One thing to note, if you go back to zone role, let's say you make 5 or 6 more zones, all you have to do is come in here and click the New Absolute button, create a different zone, and associate it to another zone object. Next, I will show you how to actually view what we just created. If you go into Location Engine, there's an option under View called Spatial Relations. You can also find this option in the Map application as well. By default, it will select all the spatial relations that you've created, so just go ahead and click OK, but do note that you can turn them on and off here and change the colors. And after doing so, you can see your person object entering and exiting and the zone changing colors. One thing you might also be interested in is under the Monitoring tab. Under Monitoring, you can click Enable Trace Streams. And you can choose Spatial Monitor and click OK. It's going to restart the services. Once those services start, you'll begin to see the entry and exits event in the log. So as you can see, Mike left the conference room, Mike entered the conference room, and it will give you the timestamp.